Welcome to another episode of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. I'm Carrie Ann. In this episode, my guest and I talk about Caribbean languages. I just love when things are in alignment because this topic is one that I've wanted to discuss for the past year. And while I was preparing the guest, I was excited to see that someone left the feedback in the questionnaire that they'd love for me to do an episode on Caribbean accents. So thank you to whoever left the feedback. It was anonymous. And I realized there was no space to put your name. So I've updated the sheet. So going forward, you or anyone could leave a feedback and leave your name if you want to. But before I get into the topic, let me quickly go through this Breadfruit Media Minute. In the last episode, I introduced a new segment called the Breadfruit Minute. And Breadfruit Media is my podcast production company. So the Breadfruit Media Minute is a quick segment where I share what's coming up on other shows in the Breadfruit Media family. So let's get to this installment of the Breadfruit Media Minute. First up is Bridge to You, Understanding and Unity, hosted by Monique Russell, who has been on the Carry On Friends podcast a couple of times. Bridge to You is a podcast about unity and understanding among Black people worldwide because it doesn't subscribe to them versus us, whether it's African American, Caribbean, or African. It's all of we. In each episode, guests talk about how they've gotten to this bridge building mindset. So Monique, please tell everyone what's happening over at Bridge to You.
Hey everyone, it's Monique from Bridge to You, Understanding and Black Unity. If you enjoy listening to the Carry On Friends podcast, we have to link up on the Bridge to You podcast, hosted by me. In my latest episode, I am discussing how to decolonize your curriculum. Listen, this one is deep. Click the link in her show notes to listen to the episode. And until next time, be well.
All right, so there you have it. You could check out Bridge to You by clicking the links in the show notes. This episode with Dr. Luz on the inequalities of education was really informative. I really hope you guys get to check that out. And finally, on Style and Vibes, she's discussing the entertainment industry and domestic violence with a licensed clinical social worker who works with domestic violence cases. And the impetus for this episode is, of course, the major hype domestic abuse and revenge porn allegations. Finally, got a topic or suggestions for the show? Let me know as well. There's the link in the show notes where you could drop your feedback and suggestions. And as always, there's links to connect with me, whether it's via social media or email. Okay, that's it for the Breadfruit Media Minute. Now let's get to our main topic. It's longer than our usual episodes, but I promise it will be worth it. Dr. Kari-Lee, welcome to Carry On Friends podcast. I'm so excited to have you. How are you today?
I'm doing well and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I cannot wait to get into this topic. You don't know how long I've been wanting to have this discussion. But before we get into the discussion, why don't you tell the community of friends a little bit about who you are, Caribbean country you represent, and what you do?
Thank you. My name is Dr. Kari-Lee Grant. I was born and raised in Jamaica, West Indies. I'm an educator and an entrepreneur. I teach English to speakers of other languages and have been doing that for almost 20 years. I have taught basically from kindergarten to the graduate level. And my passion is really education research. In addition, I am totally absorbed with linguistics, both in my work and also in my research studies. I have a wonderful family whom I adore, and that's what I will share at this time.
All right. Thank you. So let me ask you, the love of linguistics, what does that entail? Because I think the ESL, English as a second language for others, I understand that concept, but tell me a little bit more about your linguistics side.
I first became introduced to linguistics back in college. At the time, my major was computer studies, computer science, and this was college here in the United States. And so one summer, I took an elective class called Introduction to Linguistics. And the professor asked me, how do you say the boys in Jamaican? So I looked at him askance. I'm like, we say the boys. And he said, no, you don't. You say the boy, them. And he told me them is a plural mark. And I was like, oh my goodness. So that was the first time anybody had ever like told me about my language that I grew up speaking. And the following summer, I changed my major from computer science to linguistics. Prior to that, in school in Jamaica, I loved Spanish. And one of my goals was always to learn a language from every continent. It's still not too late. So that early love of other languages coupled with this real academic introduction to my own language of Jamaican. I used to call it Jamaican patois, but not anymore. That experience set me on a new trajectory and I've been on it ever since. And so linguistics is the study of languages.
Boy, I tell you, stars are let me tell you, forget about stars. I know the God that we serve. Let me tell you, say he makes no mistakes.
Absolutely.
He's always right on time. And I'll tell the audience how I met you. Someone tagged me into a Clubhouse chat. It was a Saturday, so it was the Jamaican Massive Saturday night discussion, and we were talking about church, right? And we were on stage, and then I was just clicking on your bio because our names are similar. It's Carrie Ann and Dr. KariLee, right? So I saw linguistics. I was like, ooh. So I sent you a tweet and said, and had a DM. And so here we are. So it's perfect. But also going back, why you don't call it Jamaican patois anymore?
Over the years, my deep appreciation and understanding of the language I grew up speaking has grown. And patois is really a derogatory term. It's not limited to the Jamaican language. And it really basically stands for the broken form or inferior form of a language. And since Jamaican is not inferior, I do not call it patois anymore. I mean, I'll refer to it in conversation if that's what other people know, but I always seek to tell them why I don't call it that anymore.
Wow. So I'm learning something new. Patois is considered a broken or an inferior version of a language.
Yes, that's a French word that means basically that, yes.
Wow. Well, we're already learning. I would not even touch. We're not even going really deep into what we wanted to talk about. So what really inspired me was I also produce, as you know, through Breadfruit Media, different podcasts, including the BCLF Always Lit, which is associated with the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival. And there was this discussion that Donna Hemans, who is an author, and her amazing book, Tea by the Sea, is out. And there was a discussion around the book. And Crystal Satal, who it was interviewing her at the time, is from Trinidad. And they started talking about language.
You made me really think about language, right? Because this is one of the things that I was taught to hate about myself. When you're moving, your accent, your dialect, whatever it is, you move from the Caribbean, move to America. I worked really hard to erase my accent. And I mean, the way I'm talking to you right now is like my professional way of talking out in the world. It's not the way that I speak at home.
Well, language is one of those things that, I mean, it certainly is important to me, and it's hard for me, and I hope it doesn't show. Jamaican patois, for example, is one of those things that I was taught as a child was just simply broken English.
Right.
And it was, not something that you should have been speaking. So the high school I went to, there were days when there would be, girls would be fined, maybe 5 cents or 10 cents or something if they spoke, in Jamaican patois.
Then when she started going into not being able to speak it and was discouraged from talking about it, and even the school she went to, they would be fined. I wasn't shocked, but it jolted to my memory that experience, because I've lived in America so long that I completely forgot that, actually, it's not that I forgot. It's just in her retelling that story, I forgot the experience of being told not to speak it. So, because when people here, when I live here, when I came here, they were like, oh, yeah, man. And I'm like, no, we don't say that. And I would say, we speak proper, full English in school.
Wow.
And people were surprised. I'm like, yes, we speak English in Jamaica. We cannot speak this in school. So I know that I've told that story, but Donna's retelling of her personal story brought back that personal emotion. I don't know if I'm making sense. Like
Yes, absolutely.
You neutralize it like, yeah, we talk English. But when she said it and she told it, yeah, we went to an all-girls school. I went to an all-girls school, and I know exactly what she meant. It was just like, oh, yes. Because I got called out a couple of times for, saying or not speaking properly. So I really wanted to have this discussion because is the rejection of our language self-erasure? That's the first question. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. You heard the clip, the first clip.
Yes.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
I believe that, I heard the clip and I know that that was the experience for some students, but it was not the experience for all students. I think a lot depended on the school. Like I went to a girls' school in Jamaica myself, and I did not have that experience in my school. I had a very strict principal at the time. And frankly, if she had instituted that, you best believe we would have adhered to it without question, because that was how we respected her and were very obedient to this particular principal. I think because my school had, like many schools, quite a variety of students from upper class and wealthy. And I say that in quotation marks, the upper class, because, classism exists, even though, we may not subscribe to it ourselves. But for the purpose of this conversation, there were children from upper class and middle class, lower class. So you'd have children living in Beverly Hills and you'd have children living in a garrison community, all in the same space. So I believe our educators, and rightfully so, gave space to students regardless of what version of the English they spoke or whether or not they were primarily Jamaican speakers. So I personally never witnessed or experienced any teacher telling us that we could not speak Jamaican. I did witness teachers encouraging us to speak properly, especially when there were cases of students, particularly in English class, who chose not to. I remember a particular student who, obviously in retrospect, Jamaican was her first language, and she'd been English class and she was very, very expressive in it. And I remember one day she explained something, and it was actually a little crude. It wasn't the language, but it's what we were talking about in class. And my response to her, and I didn't usually speak Jamaican in that particular English class, my response to her was, Lord, so-and-so, you can't talk English in the English class. Which is, no, I think I said something like, this is English class, they talk English, man, which wasn't derogatory for her, but it was like, whoa, it was so obvious. So here I was chiding her to speak English in an English class, and I was chiding her in Jamaican. So it was kind of funny. I was not doing it to belittle her at all. I was just doing it to be amusing, but also because of what she was saying. The topic was a little bit crude. So it affected our ladylike sensibilities at the time. And I am happy that that particular student, now that I think about it, A, chose to express herself in Jamaican freely, and B, was really given the space to express herself in Jamaican freely, including in an English class. So I did not have that experience, but I knew about experiences in a lot of other schools where, things had to be meticulous. They measured your body, they measured your uniform length, and they measured your language, because they felt that if you were a product of that particular school and you spoke in a manner that they did not feel was ladylike or befitting your circumstances, then you would not represent them well. And representation was key. So at those other schools, there were also a wide variety of students from various socioeconomic class groups. And that's the beauty of Jamaican schools, right? You kind of entered regardless of we didn't have zip codes, but you entered regardless of your PO, regardless of Kingston this or Kingston that, or if you're in the rural parishes, it really didn't matter. It was more equal opportunity in a sense based on what you could produce, right? I feel based on my personality, as quiet as I was in my initial years in high school, I probably would have bucked that particular system, even on behalf of others, if I saw it. And so, when I hear things like that, it really, really, really bothers me, because that's erasure, plain and simple. And not just erasure, that is pedagogical malpractice for any educator to tell any student that you cannot express yourself in your home language in an institution of education is malpractice. It is silencing someone. It is making them feel like they do not belong. It is belittling their homes. And it's against everything that we should stand for as a people.
You just bring back some memories, because going back to the school that I went to, yes, our uniforms are measured. They had to be below our knees. We had to hold up our hand. And if your fingernail went up above, you'd have to cut it. It was cut on spot. There was, that's the levels that I experienced when I was in high school. But to your point, yes, it was about the representation, the brand of the school. You don't want to embarrass the school. And which is why it wasn't recommended, or to speak this way in school. So initially, when that clip, and I heard Crystal talk about her experience, this idea of code switching, which I want to get to.
Yes.
I thought, Donna spoke about it in school, and I've heard that as an experience. And Crystal, when she mentioned that, this is my professional voice, and when I'm home, this is how I talk, in terms of code switch. On this podcast, I do a lot of code switching, and people ask me how you do it. I say, I don't know. I just do it. Right.
Yes.
And I remember 2 years after moving to the US, I went back to Jamaica to spend the entire summer. And I remember my cousins, them say, Lord, Kari, your chat was down when you didn't live down here. It was just like, oh my goodness. And it's because the one thing that I learned by coming to America was language was what I had. So I held on for dear life. Like I'd reach for sayings that my grandmother probably said in the 1980s, and people are like, oh my God, I can't tell when last you hear it. But it's not like I'm keeping them on rapid to say. It's just because it's that love for the language and the expression that I say it. So let's talk about code switching a little bit. What are your thoughts on code switching? Is that us not being authentic? Is it necessary? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So we do know that, rejecting our accent or speaking in our native dialects or Creole or whatever language we want to call it can be a form of erasure if we're trying to neutralize our voice. But what about code switching, going back and forth depending on our audience? What are your thoughts on that?
I think code switching is a beautiful thing. At the same time, I think it depends on the reason. If I'm code switching freely, it's wonderful. If I feel like I'm forced to code switch, then that could become a problem. So, I'm an educator. I teach English to speakers of other languages. Obviously, when I'm in the classroom with them, I'm going to be speaking American English or standard American English. I put that in quotation mark as well, because, the notion of standard is something else. It's another discussion for another time, right? So they're not going to expect me to switch to Jamaican in the classroom. Of course, from time to time, I do throw it in there, because we're learning about various languages. And if they're going to incorporate their languages from time to time, I'm going to put mine in too. I'm going to put my own in there too. And they love it. They're like, say it again. So, they see that, whoa, they're learning English and they know that's different from English. It sounds different from the little or much they know. So I actually put a little piece of that in there too, when we're having, discussions around languages, or just to add my take to the story. I actually did a PD, and I did code switch in the PD because that was the point of the professional development. It incorporated my language. So when I can do that freely, I do it at home a lot, then I love it. I absolutely love it. And by the way, every bilingual or multilingual individual code switches. If I feel, however, that I'm at work and I cannot be myself, and if I speak Jamaican, then I would probably get fired, or somebody would consider me to be unprofessional, then I would have a problem with it. So I love it. But if someone is being forced to code switch, then there's a problem. And just for clarification for the audience, code switching is when you switch between languages, sometimes in a sentence, sometimes in different spaces. So I could be speaking in one sentence, I could be talking to Kari and like this, and Chumino says she chat Jamaican to me, just switching to Jamaican in the middle of the sentence. So one sentence is both, or it could be like I'm speaking just one language the whole time in this setting, and I switch to a completely different language. I keep them separate. So, that's code switching.
I don't even know which one of the things I need to follow up with, because this is exactly the conversation I wanted to have, right? So before I even prepared, we started recording, we got an audience question, right? And it said the advantages of accents and the disadvantages and how you're viewed in your home country with an American accent compared to a U.S. Caribbean accent in America. So I guess let me clarify that. The question was your thoughts around accents, because going home, you know, having an American accent is more ideal because you're perhaps viewed better with the accent, you're twanging, as we would say in Jamaica.
Yes, yes.
Versus, you know, being here in Brooklyn, you know, New York, tri-state area, period, and you're dropping your accents wherever it is. It's more a badge of honor and pride.
Right.
And what is your thought process on that? I mean, culturally, and I guess we all know this is a spillover from colonial times, but talk to me a little bit about this idea around language, accents, and, you know, making the native tongue appear inferior to a foreign accent. And what does that do to a person when they are considered not refined or not polished or whatever the experience they might experience because of how their home country views them with an accent versus an American accent and otherwise. So love to hear your thoughts.
All right. So I'll start with going to Jamaica with a different accent. I thought back to the Honorable Louis Bennett Coverley's poem. I don't remember the exact title. I should have had that book right beside me. And the piece of the line basically the person went to foreign, and one of the lines is, "Not even little accent, boy, not even little twat." You know, it's like she say, "You mean to say I go foreign?" And you came back and, you know, you have a little accent for prove it. So, you know, she was saying, of course, you know, she is the mother of promoting the Jamaican language, you know, or you know, the late Honorable Louise Bennett Coverley. And so, you know, part of it was a little bit, to me, a little, how should I put that, tongue in cheek, but because that was the nature of the game back then. And so when you came back from foreign, you expect to have a little accent, right? In fact, people who went for 1 week,
oh my goodness,
and came back would have a little accent. I remember once I was at church, I was a teenager, and this young man went for the summer and came back with a heavy twang. And we just basically rolled our eyes at him like, please, don't bother with it. Do not bother with it. And so he dropped that real fast. And then you had the people who were gone for quite some time, and they came back and you would not know that they had traveled, right? So
I'm sorry, but that was my experience. So when I first came to the US in 1993, my uncles had been here from they were little boys. When I mean little boys, they weren't teenagers yet. And one of my uncle, my God, in top bad, like we said, Racha. I mean, I say, how much year you in America and you sound so bad, man? Like he sounded like he never left the country. And I was always amazed that all these people, my uncle, my mother's friends, they lived here for years and they barely had a little twang about them. And now I understand part of the reason why, because, you know, the other day I was talking to a friend and they were like, Kari, over 20 odd years in America? No, sir. You know, so like in America so long, right? Because now I understand this thing about holding on to culture, the language, because it's your identity. And so, sorry, continue. I want to share that.
No, not at all. And it's funny you said it. And no offense to you at all, because it's well-intentioned. Notice that our first instinct many times is to say bad, that the person sounds bad, right?
Yes.
Or racha. That's kind of been ingrained in our psyche for so long.
Absolutely.
That speaking that way. But yet, if we're here and we hear a Spanish speaker with a heavy Spanish accent who's been here for 20 years, we don't consider that a bad thing. We hear somebody from France. We don't consider that a bad thing, right? So when you consider accents, I think some of it is colored through our perception of language, I believe, is colored through sometimes a racial lens, right? You know, if we have people who are still having European accents after being here 10, 20 years, it's like, ooh, I love your French accent.
Yes.
You know,
I just told a client that literally recently. And I said, you know what? Most multi-language people, they're, like you said, they'll code switch, right? And it's because, like you said, the perception of being a person, a Black person, not a person of color, a Black person speaking with an accent, and the idea that they may be inferior in terms of education, in terms of anything else, just inferior, period. And, you know, one of the things that I recognized was, and I learned very early, through my own experience with moot court and mock trial here in the US, I didn't want those roles because I had an accent and I didn't speak properly. And I remember my teacher at the time, Mr. Montalbano, he was like, no, you're going to do it. You are the one for this. And I'm grateful that he pushed me for that. But if he didn't, I would be hiding away from public speaking because I heard my accent, right? You know, sometimes you're talking and, you know, you want to say, you know, something and the H just come out on top of it.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes,
Like, I didn't intend for that. You know, the H just come out or you say something else, right? And so I remember those experiences in high school and thinking, oh, I need to polish this, right? But over time, I just learned that, you know, this is who I am, and I just mixed it in. But for some people, it's not so easy. And I'll tell you the experience that really changed my life and really was part of my experience with starting Carry On Friends. I was interviewing a young man for a part-time paralegal position. And I asked two standard cliche interview questions. What is something you do well? And what is something that you feel like you could, you know, improve or, you know, work on? And the young man told me his accent. He didn't like the accent. Wow. He's a Jamaican guy. And, you know, he said he didn't like the accent. And I listened to him give his explanation. And at the end of the interview, I said, your accent is not a weakness.
Yes.
It is not a weakness. And it's something that I'm so passionate about, which is why I'm so glad to finally be having this discussion on the podcast, because it's so important to who we are. And the idea of erasing your language, your native tongue, while Hollywood paying one bag of people to butcher the same language that you speak so naturally, you know, to just, man. So, okay. All right. Sorry. I'll let you continue.
No, and I can also say that, you know, a lot of times when the speakers of the language, Jamaican and other Caribbean languages, are not taken seriously because some people think it's a joke. Somebody shared a video with me and a bunch of other people, I want to say last year, and people were actually laughing at the video. And it was a video about a man being arrested, a Black Jamaican man being arrested by a white police officer in the United States. And the man was saying like, "Me nah go eat." He was speaking just in Jamaica, "Murder, help." And I'm like, why are people laughing? We're in the times that we're in, and he's crying for help. And he's saying he's afraid to go into the police vehicle. I don't know what preceded the incident. I don't know if he was right or wrong. And then when they shoved him in there, he said, "Them a lick me, them a go kill me." And people, including Jamaicans, were laughing. And I had to reply, and I'm like, how dare you? How dare you laugh at the distress that this man is in because he has chosen to speak in Jamaican? Would it have made a difference if he said, help me, they're hurting me, they're harming me, I think they're going to kill me"? Would you still be laughing? What makes somebody's pain a joke to you, especially if you understand what he's saying? And they were like, oh my God, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
You know, because in this setting here, some people are used to thinking it's comedy.
Yes.
Or thinking it's funny. And it's even in court settings. You know, we had situations where people of other descents, who are witnesses in Jamaica and here, and because they don't speak the quote unquote standard version of English of that country, they're seen as less believable. They are seen as less credible witnesses. So, you know, the vicious discrimination that Jamaican language speakers encounter, it's more than just an erasure of language, it's an erasure of self, and sometimes it's an erasure of justice.
Wow. You know, it's almost like the conversation that is happening wider on a race level. Like, you love Black people culture, but you don't love Black people. themselves. So you love Jamaican culture and the idea of Bob Marley and Rasta and Yaman and the idea that almost every Jamaican smoke weed. But when it comes to actual real people, they're not given that respect. I love the culture, but I'm not sure if you're that smart. Oh,
Correct.
this is funny. You're not serious, right?
Correct.
Wow. And we're talking about the Jamaican language because unfortunately the other accents of the Caribbean get kind of lumped into a Jamaican accent, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about even erasure for these other Caribbean countries, because they hear that accent and they automatically assume this person is a Jamaican. Any thoughts on what that person could be going through when they're like, no, I'm from Trinidad. And at some point, maybe say, I'm not even going to correct people anymore.
Right. It's also erasing the other Caribbean countries. And, when I did my dissertation for my PhD, my title actually was not just about the language. It's a kind of long title. May I say it?
Absolutely.
So my title is long. It's longer than usual, but I had to use it. It was transformative leadership, eliciting equity and excellence in the education of immigrant students from Caribbean countries where English is the medium of instruction. I took a chunk of those students from Caribbean countries where English is the medium of instruction because it was part of a title for a New York State guidance document. When I initially started out thinking about what I wanted to do for my dissertation, I was focused on Jamaican students. And one of my professors says, open it up to Caribbean students, which I did. And I'm happy I did. And so I was able to articulate the various languages. I've presented this particular dissertation in Jamaica at the Caribbean Society for Caribbean Linguistics, their biennial conference back in 2016 before I graduated. So it was all, Caribbean linguists there. So they were familiar with what we were doing. I presented this at the American Educational Research Association in New York City, which is the largest research association in the world. And then that's in 2018. In 2019, I presented this at the World Education Research Association in Japan. And I also did a presentation at Queen's College somewhere in between all of that. And every time I did a presentation, I was sure to say, students from Caribbean countries where English is the medium of instruction. In my introduction, I listed all the Caribbean countries to include St. Kitts and Nevis. I did it in alphabetical order. I don't have the whole thing. Barbados, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And even when I was doing the research, people would be like, wait, what? It's like those other countries never came to their mind, So they know Jamaica, they may know Trinidad, and that's it. So it is
now they may know Barbados because of Rihanna.
Yes, they do, and of course they know Haiti, but if we're focusing on this from the Caribbean countries where English is a medium of instruction, it is important for them to know this. I also had, and in the course of my studies, there is a book about English lexified Creoles. Again, the use of Creoles is questionable for some linguists because why are they not languages, right? Spanish and Portuguese and stuff came from Latin. We don't call them Latin Creoles, right?
Yeah.
They're Spanish. So when do we get our say and are not considered Creoles anymore? At what point do we graduate from that? But it also gave me the terminology for these other languages. So, I think Guyana was KariLees. And so we need to name these other languages as well. But first we have to accept them.
That was going to be a follow-up question. Could it be that the reason why we're still Creole is because, take for instance, Jamaica, right? There's a debate. How you spell wine, as in your bossa wine? Is it WHINE or WINE? How do you spell gal? Is it GAL or GYAL, or girl, as other Caribbean countries might say GYUL? So is there a challenge because our spelling isn't necessarily standardized as in other languages? Or could it also be, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Call it a language and standardize the spelling, or do we have to standardize the spelling to make it a language? That was a little tongue twister, but I hope you understand.
Yes, I understand. So a lot of people think that for a language to be legitimate, it has to have a written form, right? Let's say you believe in the creation story, whether from the Bible or from any part of the world,
Mm-hmm.
from any other religious group, right? The first people, if you believe they were first people, did they write down their language?
No, it was mostly
No,
hieroglyphics and tells oral stories and then hieroglyphics by the time we get to the
absolutely.
Egyptians. Yeah.
So are we saying therefore that people didn't communicate,
Yeah.
right? So if we look up the word language, yes, it includes written forms of language, but it's basically just a body of words and systems that's commonly used by a group of people. Writing is just an aside. Yes, that's one of the definitions where you have formalized sound symbols or, marks, whether it's hieroglyphics or, any other non-Roman letters, you do whatever. But if I never write it down, did I not have a language? Because there are so many languages in existence and some that have died that were never written, but people were able to communicate and communicate well. And they were distinguishable from other forms of languages. So the idea that Jamaican, for example, and by the way, they are the Jamaican Language Unit of the University of the West Indies. They do have a writing system that's been in place that they're trying to make everybody in the country and in the diaspora aware of and use. It's called the Cassidy JLU. I'm trying to remember if it's the JLU Cassidy or Cassidy. Cassidy comes first from Cassidy, who was very instrumental in trying to create a writing system in the past. And the Jamaican Language Unit tweaked it a little bit. That's readily available on the internet. So
You'll give me the links and I'll put them in the show notes and share.
Absolutely.
And in addition to your dissertation, because I'm sure that, yes, please.
Sure.
Yes, please
Thank
share
you.
all the links and the resources, because this is what this podcast is about, right? It's, we're unapologetically Caribbean. We're celebrating the things about us, but then there are moments of introspection like this, where, as you said, me say, oh, you talk so bad. I mean, it's a thing that I say, but really it's, there's not a bad thing. It's just
different.
It's just how we've been kind of.
That's how we were raised to think. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And so, switching a little bit, because you talked about Haiti, I initially thought that this was a Jamaican thing because, I'm a Jamaican, and, maybe a Trini person might have this issue, or a Bayesian, but September of last year, when I did a panel for International Podcast Day, I had different podcasters from different Caribbean countries, and Miss Soy was representing Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that I discovered her podcast in 2019, because it was, the title of the podcast is in Creole, so I cannot pronounce the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire, they were like Kringlish. They were going between Creole and English, right? But I
never heard that term before. I love it. Kringlish.
Yes. It is a term that Haitians have really adopted, Kringlish. It's this, it's like Nuyorican. It's the switching, and so I was very surprised when we were having the discussion, and she told me that Creole in Haiti was a pejorative word, like it was like a slang that it was looked down on. And I was shocked because, for anyone listening and not living in the New York City tri-state area, Creole is an official language of New York City. So when there are city announcements, you'll see English, you'll see Spanish, you'll see an Asian language represented, and you'll always see Creole and Tagalog, kind of represented on these information graphics. And I'm like, wow, in Haiti, this is the view, but in New York, they've deemed it a language enough to make sure that it's represented when it's communicated to the city residents of New York. So talk to me a little bit about, we've kind of glossed over it with Jamaica, but, with here, what's the long lasting impacts of that colonial residual view of language, and how it's viewed, how us as a people are viewed, or how we view each other, because we're kind of, inheriting the colonizers' view of ourselves.
Yes. It's basically the same thing, except a different colonizer's language. The difference is Haiti and advocates of the language have gone further. The document that I mentioned, which was the guidance document for New York State, that was spearheaded by Haitians in their bilingual technical center in New York. They spearheaded it. Haiti, unlike Jamaica, has Haitian Creole as a second official language in Haiti. So while they may not be where they should be, at the very least, both French and Haitian Creole are the official languages in Haiti. When I went to the Society for Caribbean Linguistics Association biennial conference in Jamaica in 2016, I met a professor, Dr. Michel de Graff, who is an absolute advocate. He's a professor at MIT, and he has a thing called the MIT Haiti Initiative. And one of the many things he seeks to do with that is to foster the use of Haitian in Haitian schools, particularly in teaching STEM subjects. And he's on social media, and besides his day job, that's his passion. And he works tirelessly. And what he told us is when they had that major earthquake in Haiti, they were having a big meeting with linguists there, and most of them died. The building collapsed. So that was a huge setback. It was devastating. The deaths were devastating in and of themselves. And it also caused a huge setback regarding linguistics in Haiti as a result of that. But Haitian Creole is on Google Translate. I mean, come on.
Yes, I saw that.
Haitian Creole is one of the top 5 spoken languages in New York State. So when the students take in grades 3 to 8 or high school, grades 9 to 12, when they take any state assessment, all of those state assessments are also available, except for English assessments. They're all available in Haitian Creole as one of the top 5 languages. So it's an interesting case of a language that has gotten high recognition outside of Haiti, but perhaps not so much in Haiti.
Yeah.
And again, it's the colonial mindset. I've seen Haitian educators say to me that Haiti is a broken language. Meanwhile, they're educators of students, including Haitian speaking students from Haiti. Wow. No, I don't hear them saying it directly to the students themselves, but that's the mindset of educators who are.
But that's not uncommon, which is, again, it's this carryover. And it's like, how do we begin to see our language very differently? Because it's not like but, I understand why the Bayesian, the Guyanese, the Trini, the Vinci, whoever else, the Grenadian might get annoyed when someone assumes that they're Jamaican, because that's not their identity. And no one, they don't even ask. They just assume. Right?
Yeah.
And I can understand that. I can totally understand what that feeling is, because you're constantly having to validate or say, my culture exists. It's not only Jamaica alone in the Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
My culture exists. So language is such an integral part to who we are. While we're unapologetically Jamaican, we're also part of a larger community. And how do we, begin to respect each other's culture and, the cultural exports, which include language? We have how many Caribbean countries, states, and territories, and all of them have a different. No, you're making me second guessing the word Creole and using Creole.
No, but you can go ahead and say for the purpose of this, because it's a familiar term to some people, but, as we continue, we shift and, uplift the terms.
Exactly. As we build awareness, now we start thinking of the words that we're using. But the native dialects of each Caribbean country, they may be nuanced a little bit, but it still exists. I can't tell another Grenadian person but they can tell each other's language. And that's very important. So talk to us about the work that we should be doing. What do you say to the student who doesn't like their accent? What do you say to all these different things that we use to erase part of ourselves, whether intentionally or not? What do you say about the power of language and the preservation of our culture and our heritage?
You mean the Caribbean as a whole, right?
The Caribbean as a whole,
right? Yes. As a whole, yes. First, I want to touch briefly on the use of the term dialect. Every language is, I don't have the exact person to cite, but there's somebody to cite. It's actually my dissertation. So my apologies for not citing the proper person, but these are not my words. Every language is a dialect, and every dialect is a language. The one that they call language is the one with power, right? So we should step away from calling the Caribbean languages a dialect. because they are all languages of themselves. Again, we would not consider, if we go to England, for example, there are various dialects of their language there because there are regional variations.
Yes.
Right? So, dialect is another term to consider, like which languages do we call dialects and which language do we call language? And it's all about power. The other thing to consider is cohesiveness in the Caribbean. Because of the nature of the contributions of Jamaica on the world stage, we're talking through reggae music, we're talking through athletics, and just about everywhere. Let me say everywhere you go, you see a Jamaican. So we kind of, I would say we jaminate or we dominate,
yes,
which is not through no fault of our own, right? And as much as we are a small island, we are among the larger, quote unquote, large ones. So we're larger than some of the other islands. So between worldwide contributions and quote unquote size, because we little with Talawa, as they say, right? Some of it we really can't help. And so many people think, I've seen comments that, you Jamaicans this and you Jamaicans that. So one approach could be, to whom much is given, much is expected. If we have the ear of the world, we should use our capital to bring along our Caribbean people if they want to, because we also have to understand that there have been instances in other countries where Jamaicans have been discriminated against for various reasons. They may say one country in particular, I'm not going to call any names, because, you can't judge a whole group of people in a country by the actions of a few. But there seems to be we're going to treat you a little kind of way, a little worse, just because you're Jamaican. I've seen several stories about that, and I've overheard several people saying, but again, I'm not judging a group, so I'm not calling any countries' names. But we also have to consider things like we have been involved in as a Caribbean community. How are we doing there on those larger scales in terms of how our heads of governments interacting? The one thing we have been the examinations, right? I know when it was in my time, it was CXC.
So I don't know what it is.
I think it's the thing slipped my mind.
CSEC or something. Yes,
CSEC, right? And they have CAPE for the advanced classes. So thankfully, we have at least that. So we have. I remember the year before I took CXC, it was GCE, and that was straight England. Thankfully, we at least have established a system of education where we can say we're in more or less one accord across the Caribbean region, right? And so it's like a standard that we have decided to share. Can we then use any country of influence to bring the others up without thinking we're going to lose our share of the pie? Can we perhaps stop referring to the smaller islands as small islands? And seek to bring others on board. And this is why a space like yours, Carry On Friends, is absolutely powerful. Because as I was looking at some of the stuff, I see you have voices of the various people from various Caribbean communities represented. This is where spaces like Caribbean clubs in schools, colleges, universities are so essential to sustaining Caribbean life. When I first came to this country, one of my friends was attending college at one of the schools in New York City, and she was part of the Caribbean Club. And I went with them to a couple of outings, and they were from all over. And I remember once a whole bunch of us got on the subway, and man, we were speaking. And I was smiling and I was reflecting to myself, I understand everybody. There's some words that are different, and all the other people were just looking at us like, what they say? You could tell the people who understood us, but you heard the Bajan person, the Trini person, the Guyanese person, and the this person, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful communication there. And that's why I was so happy even when I was doing my dissertation, that the professor, who was not from the Caribbean but was African American, said to me, "Why just do Jamaican? Why not do the Caribbean?" And he didn't have to tell me twice.
Yeah.
Because why not? And I want to also say something else with regard to the Creoles. It's not just French lexified Creoles. And I use lexified because it's lexicon dealing with words. So our language that we speak in Jamaican, as some people may or may not know, it uses a lot of English vocabulary, a lot of English words, a lot of West African words from the various West African countries that were represented through enslavement. And after that, through, other people who came who were freed, but who were also African people who came to the country. It's not just English words. There are lots of West African words. The grammatical structure is primarily from various West African languages. That's another detail for another time. Yeah. And so if you want to think about it, the parent languages of Jamaican are English. And by the way, English take enough other people language to make it up. Enough people language make up English.
Yes.
And English and various West African languages. And they have specifics. Dr. Joseph Farquharson, actually, his dissertation for his PhD in linguistics dealt a lot about the African components of the Jamaican language. So, when we consider all of this, we can then decide to make sure that we share our commonality with Africans. There are Spanish countries. There are countries where Spanish is the official language that go through the same thing. If we think that people in Puerto Rico and Cuba, etc., speak, quote unquote, the Spanish that they speak in Spain, we're sadly mistaken. And I know that for a fact. A lot of the students I teach, and we jump a little bit into South America, a little bit since they're right there. A lot of my students are from South America and Central America and the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And they're in bilingual programs as part of our program. And they struggle in their bilingual classes because many of them, they have Spanish down as their home language, but they really speak quote unquote Spanish Creole. In fact, some of them also speak indigenous languages in the region. But because they erase that language, it's not considered. So we also have to bring them into the conversation as well, and there are other places where they have French lexified language. There are places there were multiple languages like Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao.
Papiamento.
Yes. So bring everybody in, and then we can truly talk about colonization and our mutual parent of the various West African languages. That needs to happen. And it will happen. Again, we talk about the Society for Caribbean Linguistics. They're a key source of bringing these languages together. And hopefully they can continue to expand their reach.
I was taking some notes because I have some follow-up. Wow. I don't think this is going to be a one-part conversation. There's going to be follow-ups, but I'd be remiss if I don't bring up the thing that touched everybody can. I have a fun question for you, but before we get to the fun question, the thing that bother everybody, why they pick this fake Rasta with the worst Jamaican accent on TV? What is the psychology behind that? We understand that, not everybody's actors, but why? The question always is, why not find a real Jamaican who speaks this language? Why insist on butchering? Whether, even for me, I'm big on audiobooks. It's the same thing. Like, I cannot listen to someone butcher a Jamaican accent in an audiobook. Why is there such an industry structured around erasing the native speaker and hiring a non-native speaker who then reads a book, and then a non-native speaker hears this and says, oh, I heard this Jamaican accent. You see how that perpetuates over time?
Yes.
Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, why is the, it's like a sore point. There's not one Caribbean person who won't say yes. And they will tell you the exact show that has committed the offense for them, right?
I think part of it is, and I could be wrong, I think part of it is they want you to be authentic, but not too authentic because they fear that people won't understand, if that makes any sense.
It sure does.
Yes. They want it to be palatable to their potential audience. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And they've done that in various ways too. And they do it on another level. I know we're talking about Jamaicans. That's why sometimes they will have non-Black people play Black people role.
Yes.
Because them don't want to pay them the money, and they want it to be palatable to whoever they think their audience will be.
Yes.
So that's that piece too. And it's an absolutely abhorrent practice. It's almost like a violation of a culture. It's cultural appropriation. For the amount we have drama schools in Jamaica, we have, people focus a lot on the music, but we have had pantomimes. We have had so many brilliant playwrights and artists in various performing art forms. They have more than enough people who can play that role. Pay them the money, give them the roles. There's no reason for them not to. And I think maybe, in the same way that Jamaicans have a big hue and cry when people put out jerk chicken and they say, no jerk chicken this. Oh, what is? And there's a big stink. I remember there was a thing with Dole or some.
The reason, like, who put
yes,
reason on this? Like,
I will make whole heap of nines. Maybe we should start making some nines when they put the wrong people in our spaces and try to pass them off as Jamaicans.
Yeah. And there's a movement that's happening. Trust me, there's a movement where, this is in the podcast space, in independent media now, because now you don't need a full on TV. You have an idea, you could get funding for a script, pick up on YouTube or Amazon. There are all these new ways that Caribbean people are taking up space. And I'm just so excited about, the projects that are coming out. So
yes.
Again, this was just a lovely conversation. So I have a fun question for you, right?
All right.
Yes. What is your favorite Jamaican expression? That means that no matter what you're saying, in an English, this a sentence here, this just don't sit right. It have to give in a Jamaican. What is that expression?
Yes, I'm going to tell you that right now. Me not frightened for duppy. Me frightened duppy.
That's a good one. That is a good one. What is mine? I have too many of them. I can't pick one.
Shall I translate it for our audience members who may not be Jamaican, shall we?
Yes, thank you for being so mindful.
Duppies are Jamaican ghosts. They're not your average ghosts, I mean, people believe or not in ghosts. That's not the point of this explanation, right? But the typical ghost is like, okay, your ghost boo back at you. Duppy is on a whole nother category. They're meant to be feared, right? And so the fact that you can say, I'm not afraid or I'm not frightened of ghosts means say, hey, don't even think about messing with me. That's not to say I'm a, fire type of person and I do this and I fight. None of that stuff. I'm not that. But what you will not do is mess with Dr. Kari-Lee Grant or just KariLee. I don't stand for that. And so that's just that expression. It's funny. I've used it in so many really weird settings, including in a church. And I use it for not just I don't have back and forth with people like that. So I usually use this in a very fun way. I must put that disclaimer out there.
Yes.
Yes. All right.
I have a similar one that's similar, and it's used in a fun way, which I would say, duppy know who for frightened.
Yes.
That, the ghosts will scare who they want to scare. But to your point, not scare me because I'm over there. So I love it. So as we wrap up, right, we talked about language and, repressing or, telling anyone to not speak their language or even, saying if a person talk bad, it's kind of putting down a person's language and their form of self-expression. And there's a holdover from colonial times, which is part of why there's an erasure in terms of not speaking this freely. And then we also touched on the difference where our native Caribbean countries may see language differently versus how we speak it in the diaspora. But that's also nuance. We talked about how nuanced that is because depending on the conversation, we may have to code switch, not voluntarily, but because of work, because we may be perceived as inferior or we may not be taken seriously. It just is a comedy relief, basically. And then what else did we talk? We touched on all the resources available, which we will share with the audience and put in the show notes of the work that's being done by you and your peers and colleagues on making the language of the Caribbean recognized. And that as a region, that we all have powerful languages, even if it's not yet, people don't want to yet recognize it. As you pointed out, you gave us that history lesson again. We've come from the human civilization has come from the oral tradition before we got to hieroglyphics, before we got into the Gutenberg, when, the Enlightenment age, before printing press. So, if anyone says that, we don't have a standard way to spell patois or what, well, we get a new understanding of that. But even then, it is still a language to be recognized. And what can we do as a region to, some solidarity around the push for the recognition of what we speak as official languages. This was such an insightful conversation. Any last words? If there's one thing you want the audience to take away from this, what do you want the audience to understand?
I would just like the audience to understand that when we're talking about, there's some statements that some people find to be politically charged. One such statement is Black Lives Matter. Dr. Michel de Graaf has said a statement that Black lives won't matter until Black languages matter. So I would say for the people who are Black and the people who are not Black, if you're thinking equity, if you're thinking fairness, if you're thinking inclusion, understand that Black lives are not limited to Black bodies, which are essential. Do not snuff out a Black life by snuffing out their language, even if you've never touched a hair on their head or harmed their body. You harm people when you denigrate their language, even if you yourself are a speaker of that language. Open your hearts and minds, if you have not yet done so, to understand what language truly is, what language means. Every speaker of a Jamaican language or Caribbean language is educated in their own way and use their language to benefit society. Start with where they are with their language, as it's as equally important as English. Use it in education. Do not limit it to just entertainment. It's very much a part of education. Embrace it, use it, teach it, spread it.
Wow, thank you. And, as you were saying that, I was so inspired because I've learned there's this negative aspect of the term patois or even Creole. And then I'm like, how do I move forward with this new sense of awareness? I speak Jamaican.
Yeah.
I
just one
Trinidadian.
time,
Yeah, right. Like I don't have to add this to it. If we're between family and we're among friends, we know what we're talking, but still we need to practice. I speak Jamaican, which is, English and this richness of this mix. Cause I even think some Spanish word in a Jamaican,
Yes, they are.
Jamaican,
they are.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and there's some words from Arawak too. It's not just English.
Yes. And we don't study. And again, we don't study this enough. We don't study this enough. I have another, I produce shows and I have another show that I would love to talk about the history of our language. So yes, no worry. Yes, we're all family. So everyone, thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, if you have feedback, please send me an email, hello@KariOnFriends. Also, there's going to be the feedback form in the show notes. Click that as well. Let me know what you want to hear. Dr. Kari-Lee, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me, if you're on Clubhouse, I'm at KG3Educator. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at KG3Educator. So that's KG3EDUCATOR. Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse. Also on Facebook, you can find me at Kari-Lee Grant, KARI-LEE Grant, GRANT. Awesome. And on LinkedIn as well, Kari-Lee Grant.
All right. Make sure you connect. I'm definitely going to connect with her on the other platforms as well. And as I love to say at the end of the show, walk good.
The Carry On Friends podcast is produced by Breadfruit Media, and new episodes are available every other Tuesday morning. You can listen to the podcast on the website, KariOnFriends.com, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to your podcast. The Carry On Friends podcast is produced by Breadfruit Media, and new episodes are available every other Tuesday morning. You can listen to the podcast on the website, KariOnFriends.com, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to your podcast.